Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your Chief Security Fanatic here, and it is Sunday, so we are doing Breaches of the Week. And this week in Breaches was crazy like every other week, so no time to lose, let's dive right in. But before I start, I want to thank the following people that sent me a lot of this information. First things first, big shout out to Jay Dance, who sent me a ton of stuff in the last couple of weeks on a lot of various breaches and attacks and all that, much of which is here. So thank you very much. That's a huge help as I've been playing catch up the last couple of weeks. As well, Jacqueline Wolf, thank you very much, and Orlando Ortiz and Anatoly Koromov, thank you so very much, and please keep sending those tips my way. Now with that, let's start in Scotland with the National Health Service. They got hit by a cyber attack, potentially disrupting services and exposing patient and employee data. Now we don't know that much right now about what's going on, but what we do know is the Dumfries and Galloway, which is the southernmost council area of Scotland, was the one that was hit. They have a population of approximately 150,000. So heads up to you, Dumfries and Galloway Council citizens. You may be exposed, services may be disrupted. They're still figuring that out. Moving on, let's head across the sea channel, whatever it is, from Scotland over to Ireland, and you tell me which it is. I'm not 100% sure, but the Health Service Executive, or HSE, in Ireland is what we're talking about here, because a researcher disclosed a Salesforce configuration error that exposed millions of Irish citizens' COVID vaccination data. Now, this oversight allowed regular low-level accounts belonging to just standard HSE patients unprecedented access to part of the system responsible for storing information about vaccine administration. Now, the exposed object in question included full names of patients and all information related to their jabs, the brand of vaccine, date, location, and site which it was administered, and any reasons why they either accepted or refused the jab. So with that, documents also belonging to staff members and information related to IT was exposed. So heads up to you, Irish citizens, if you got or refused the jab, you might have a record out there. Moving on, let's head on back across the sea or channel or whichever it is to the London's Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime. They are known as MOPAC. Now, they're getting hit by regulators for a quote-unquote untidy tech practices, per the publication in the UK, that made public the personal data of hundreds of people who have actually filed complaints against the Metropolitan Police Department. Now, we're talking about 400 or so people that were exposed basically starting 17 months ago due to a website misconfiguration. So hopefully they've got that cleaned up. But if you've ever filed a complaint against the Met, you might want to check in. Moving on. Let's talk about 2/3 of France's population. Now, a large-scale data breach has compromised the personal information of a staggering 43 million French workers, and that's obviously raising concerns about things like identity theft and fraud. Now, the attack is believed to have impacted around 2/3 of France's population. The unclaimed cyber attack targeted 2 French employment agencies, France Travail and Cap Emploi. Now, on March 13 of this year, French employment agency France Travail, previously called Pôle Emploi, announced that they basically became the victim of a data breach that exposed the personal data of their registered users. We're talking names, social security numbers, dates of birth, email, postal addresses, phone numbers, and user IDs as well. France Travail named another company, Cap Emploi, a government employment service supported by people with disabilities, as a victim in that breach as well. So France Travail confirmed that login credentials, passwords, and bank details were not at risk. So if you are one of the 2/3, of French citizens that were caught up with this, you definitely want to check in. Moving on, let's talk about Viber, specifically their voice over IP platform. Now, Viber is known for its encrypted messaging and voice services, and they have millions of users worldwide who rely on their platform for secure communication. Attackers are claiming, that they stole 740 gig of data from Viber. So that's awesome. Now, the breach, if confirmed, again, if confirmed, represents one of the largest in recent history, potentially exposing a huge amount of personal information. Now, in response to the allegations, Viber issued the following statement, quote, "We are aware of the claim and are investigating the validity of the alleged breach with utmost urgency. The security of our users' data is our top priority," end quote. So hopefully Viber wasn't hit and it's a hoax, but we'll see, and I'll keep you up to date here. Moving on. Let's talk about boat dealer Marine Max. You might have bought a boat from them, apparently. Now, they're a Florida-based company, and they revealed in a regulatory filing, apparently an 8K with the SEC, that they detected a quote-unquote cybersecurity incident on March 10th. Now, the incident is still being investigated, but at the time of the filing, they did not have a material impact on their operations. The company likely made this note in response to new SEC rules, which require public companies to disclose any material breach within 4 business days. Based on the limited information that has been made public, this could be a ransomware attack, but nobody's taken responsibility just yet. So heads up to you, customers and employees of Marine Max. Moving on. Let's talk about Acer, the large computer manufacturer, specifically Acer Philippines. Now, they confirmed that employee data was stolen in an attack on a third-party vendor who manages the company's employee attendance data after a threat actor leaked that data on a hacking forum. Acer, as I mentioned, is out of Taiwan. They make computer hardware and electronics. They're best known for laptops, etc., etc. The threat actor known as Phins, that's PH1NS, published a link to download the stolen database containing Acer employee data for free on a hacking forum. So if you work for Acer Philippines or Acer in general, you might want to check in. Moving on, let's talk about Kids Empire. I've never heard of them, but they're an operator of recreational centers intended to provide indoor fun facilities for kids. Now, a non-password protected database that contained over 2.3 million documents belonging to Kids Empire has been exposed to the world. Now, this database contained 2,363,222 documents in PDF and PNG. That's the image format. For a total size of 92.3 gigabytes. And I apologize, I am obviously really congested right now. The weather here is absolutely nuts. Now, of that 92.3 gigabytes, those included reservations, injury waivers, and receipts with partial credit card numbers and transaction details. Additionally, there were gift cards with no expiration date, source images for websites, and templates. It's unclear how long this data was exposed or if anybody may have accessed it after it was discovered or prior to its discovery, as only internal forensic audits could identify this information. It has now been secured. So if you have a Kids Empire brand of facility near you, you might want to check in, especially if you're using it, obviously. Moving on, let's head on over to Stanford University. Yes, Stanford. Apparently, they failed to detect ransomware intruders for 4 months. Now, the Acura ransomware gang targeted the university's Department of Public Safety, DPS, and this week, basically, their filing with the Office of the Maine Attorney General indicated that Stanford became aware of the incident on September 27, more than 4 months after that initial breach took place. According to this past Monday's filing, the breach occurred on May 12, 2023, was discovered on September 27 of last year, and that obviously raises questions on whether the attackers were inside the network the entire time, why it took so long to spot them, etc., etc. Roughly 27,000 people related to Stanford, students, etc., were basically caught up in this. So heads up to you if you go to Stanford or you work at Stanford. Moving on. Let's talk about Equilend, because they're a financial technology firm, and they recently disclosed a data breach originating from a January ransomware attack. Now, the attack, which according to Bloomberg's report, is attributed to Lockbit, basically said that they compromised personal information of employees. Equilend initially reported a quote-unquote technical issue on January 24th, leading to service disruptions. They later confirmed it was a ransomware attack, and there we are. Now, according to notifications sent by the company to impacted customers, the attack compromised sensitive employee data, including names, dates of birth, social security, and internal payroll information. So, heads up to you if you work for Equilend. Moving on, let's head back on over the pond and talk about Kate Middleton. That's right, Prince William's wife, mother of the future king, I believe, and all that kind of stuff. Now, we recently heard, that obviously she had cancer and all of that and came out with this as I was compiling those notes. And so, obviously, best of luck to Kate, and obviously her father-in-law, King Charles, also has cancer as well. And so hopefully both will make speedy recoveries. But let's talk about manipulated pictures, because multiple news UK outlets, or specifically news outlets, were basically reporting that 3 staff members at the London clinic where Kate Middleton underwent surgery in January could be investigated and potentially disciplined for allegedly trying to access Kate Middleton's personal medical information. Apparently they never heard or were aware of the UCLA Britney Spears Spears situation where nurses were attempting to get to Britney Spears' information when she was checked in, I believe, to like the mental ward or something like 15 years ago or so, trying to sell it to the Inquirer. And then there's other royals that are actually caught up in this as well. The personal medical records of King Charles III were not accessed in this alleged data breach at the London hospital, according to multiple British media outlets, including CNN's affiliate ITV, Sky News, etc., etc. So this obviously is a huge thing, and so hopefully, you know, obviously Kate Middleton is good. I thought it was originally about manipulated pictures when I compiled this notes, but no, it's about people trying to access her medical records, and, you know, I don't care if she's a princess or a queen or whatever her title is, Duchess? I think she's a duchess. Anyway, everybody has a right to privacy, and when you're talking about some of the most scrutinized people in the world, it's doubly so, because that stuff getting out is just salacious and horrible, and that family's been through, quite frankly, quite a bit of that, thanks to Princess Diana, obviously, who's no longer with us. So never a good thing, but best of luck to you, Kate. Moving on, let's talk about Air Europa. Spanish airline Air Europa said this past Friday that personal data of its customers may have been compromised in a security incident that was detected in October of 2023. Now, their investigation showed that ID cards or passport details, date of birth, telephone, email address, and nationality details may have been leaked. Air Europa told its customers in an email that was seen by the publication Reuters. Air Europa also said the company immediately reported the situation to the data protection authorities in Spain, and so basically customers as well were notified, so please take proper precautions. So if you're flying Air Europa, heads up. Moving on. Let's talk about Nations Direct Mortgage back here in the United States. Now, the incident, the lender said in their notification, was identified on December 30 of last year and resulted in unauthorized access to certain information containing clients' personal info and other Nations Direct data as well. What we're talking about here are names, address, social security numbers, and Nation Direct loan numbers. Nation Direct claims basically that it contained the incident shortly after discovering this and then notified relevant authorities. While the notification does not say how many were affected, Nations Direct informed Maine that it's sending written letters to 83,000 people. Now, I'm sure that's not all Mainers, because Maine's a pretty small state, but we'll see what happens. But if you use Nations Direct for your loans, heads up to you. Moving on, let's head on over to Japan and talk about multinational IT giant Fujitsu. They said they may have been the victim of a malware attack that may have resulted in threat actors exfiltrating personal data and private customer information. Now, Fujitsu is said to have left unprotected some private AWS or Amazon Web Services keys, client data, and plain text passwords, my God, for upwards of a year, based on a report from security researcher with the Dutch Institute for Vulnerability Disclosure. Now, the researcher, Jelly Ursum, told the Stack, the publication I'm cribbing from here, that the company unknowingly exposed a public Microsoft Azure storage bucket that included backup emails with sensitive data, passwords pulled from Password Manager LastPass, that's awesome, and scores of Microsoft OneNote files as well. So obviously not a good look for Fujitsu. Hopefully they've got that locked down. Moving on. Let's talk about the Oakview Group. On January 10, they filed with the Attorney General of Iowa after discovering an unauthorized party was able to access their infrastructure. Now, part of their notice, they said, was names and social security numbers. They've sent letters out to those affected as well. So heads up, Oakview Group patients, I'm assuming it's patients, and employees. Moving on, let's head on over to Illinois and talk about Valley Oaks Health in Niles. They recently notified 50,352 individuals about their breach. Unauthorized individuals gained access between June 8th through the 13th of last year, and they secured their network, and they brought in third-party experts, etc., etc., and forensic investigation and document review were completed on February 2nd of this year. And in a breach notification sent to Maine, they said the specific types of compromised data redacted, basically was redacted, but they confirmed that the names have been exposed along with social security numbers. Those notifications were mailed on March 18. So heads up to you, Valley Oaks Health patients in Niles, Illinois. Moving on. Weirton Medical Center in West Virginia. They identified suspicious activity on January 18th of this year, and unauthorized access apparently was between January 14th through the 18th, and files were copied from its system. And so they're saying it may have included name, social security, date of birth, medical information, health insurance information, treatment information, and balance due on medical bills. Moving on, let's head on down to Sycamore Rehabilitation Services in Illinois. Sycamore Rehab, basically in Danville, Illinois specifically, even though Sycamore is a town in Illinois, so figure that one out. Anyway, they reported a breach of basically their email system and exposure of personal data of 3,414 individuals. This breach was detected on September 21. They had an investigation, and they figured out that network access was between July 29 through August 9 of this year, but they figured it out like a month and a half after that, apparently. Now, during that time, there may have been unauthorized access to names, dates of birth, social security, driver's license numbers, state IDs, account numbers, routing numbers, medical information, and health insurance info. So, heads up to you, Sycamore Rehabilitation Services patients in scenic Danville, Illinois. Moving on, let's talk about the Plymouth Tube Company, also in Illinois. They identified unauthorized access in their infrastructure, and that happened between January 27 through January 29 of this year. Apparently, access or acquired files was also happening during this, and 2,652 current and former employees and their dependents have been caught up in this. So figure healthcare information, name, date of birth, social security, driver's license number, and health plan information was caught up, and they've started sending out letters as well. Moving on, let's talk about Philip Respironics. On March 4, they filed with Health and Human Services after discovering an unauthorized party was able to access information that was entrusted to them. They've begun sending out breach notification letters as well. I don't have more on that one, but heads up if you are a customer of Philip Respironics, and I swear I talked about them a few months ago, possibly another breach. We'll see. I'll check up on that. Moving on, MediaWorks. This is a company based out of New Zealand. They're investigating an alleged security incident after an attacker claimed to have stolen data of just over 2.4 million people and began extorting individuals for payments. Now, MediaWorks confirmed the database held name, date of birth, gender, address, postcode, and mobile number, end quote, as well as in some cases images or videos uploaded as part of people's entries to a competition. Financial details such as credit card numbers and passwords are not believed to be affected. So if you're a MediaWorks user, customer, client, employee, whatever, heads up. Moving on, let's do our mini segment. Basically, if you just spent more on cybersecurity, you wouldn't be getting sued, you wouldn't be damaging your reputation. And to kick it off, we have yet another Perry Johnson and Associates lawsuit because Concentra Health Services, who had to declare as a result of using Perry Johnson Associates as a third-party vendor, is now facing a class action lawsuit. So that's awesome. Perry Johnson is going to have one heck of a bill with all the lawsuits I keep finding on them. Moving on. Knoxville, Tennessee-based Tennessee Orthopedic Clinics. They just agreed to settle a class action lawsuit in response to a March 2023 cyber attack that impacted 46,679 individuals. Now, the information exposed, we're talking names, contacts, date of birth, diagnosis, treatment information, provider names, prescriptions, cost of services, health insurance info, etc., etc. Now, under the terms of this settlement, individuals who were notified about this breach may submit claims for ordinary expenses such as communication charges, credit expenses, bank fees, and lost time. Maximum 3 hours at $20 an hour, up to a maximum of $1,500. Claims of up to $4,000 may also be submitted for documented extraordinary suspenses, such as loss due to fraud or identity theft between March 20 and April of last year and April 8th of this year, basically provided the claimant made reasonable efforts to avoid those losses, and here we are. You have up to April 8th to file a claim. So, heads up to you if you are using Knoxville, Tennessee-based Tennessee Orthopedic Clinics, go get paid. Moving on, let's talk about Greensboro College. They failed, apparently, to protect the personal information of more than 52,000 people that was exposed in an August 23 ransomware attack. That is according to a proposed federal class action. Abigail Hedgecock alleged that the North Carolina school failed to implement adequate data security measures to protect sensitive information, maintained its network in a condition vulnerable to cyber attacks, and failed to provide adequate and timely notice of the breach. We're talking names, social security, student IDs, dates of birth, passport, health information, and on and on. So we'll see where that goes, but heads up to you. If you go to Greensboro College or work there, you may be entitled to compensation. Moving on. Convergent Outsourcing, they're a debt collection agency, settled a breach class action in the U.S. District Court in the Western District of Washington for $2.45 million. The class action suit against Convergent alleged that the businesses failed to protect the personal information of over 640,000 individuals that in this breach occurred in June of 2022. Plaintiffs allege that Convergent failed to implement appropriate security measures to protect and secure personal information in its possession, failed to monitor its network for security vulnerabilities, or implement appropriate security practices. Pursuant to the settlement, class members may receive up to $1,500 each for lost time and direct expenses, or upwards of $10,000 for extraordinary expenses. Basically the same standards as was met in the one where I was mentioning that before. A third option would allow class members to receive a pro rata share of the remaining settlement fund as well. So heads up to you, Convergent Outsourcing. If you've ever been in debt and they've been your collector, go get paid. And that ends the segment. And honestly, if all of them had just spent more on cybersecurity, wouldn't be talking about them, wouldn't be ruining reputations, they wouldn't be going through class action lawsuits. Moving on, I want to give you an update on Nissan Oceana. If you remember, they had a big data breach. They're finally notifying 100,000 individuals that the December 2023 data breach exposed their personal information. The New Zealand and Australia-based subsidiary of the Japanese automaker Nissan essentially said it detected unauthorized access on their servers on December 5th. If you recall, I talked about that back then. Responding to notifying law enforcement, regulators, etc., this all came to light. So heads up to you if you're in New Zealand or Australia and you've bought a Nissan. Moving on, BioLife Plasma Services. On March 20 of this year, they filed with Texas after discovering an unauthorized party in their infrastructure. And what we're talking about is access to consumer sensitive information. I don't know what specifically, but they are sending out notification letters as well. So heads up, BioLife Plasma Services customers. Moving on, Ultra Intelligence and Communications. On March 15, Ultra Electronics Advanced Tactical Systems, Inc., DBA, Ultra Intelligence and Communications, just known as Ultra, let's do that, filed a notice of data breach with Montana after discovering an unauthorized party in their network. Now, they explained unauthorized or sensitive information from customers was essentially stolen by unauthorized people, and they're sending out letters as well. So heads up if you've bought anything or used services from Ultra Intelligence and Communications. Moving on. Let's talk about Roku. Yes, the little box that you plug into your TV and sign up for an account and it streams everything for you. They're notifying over 15,000 customers of a recent data breach that allowed threat actors to use stored credit cards to make unauthorized purchases on some accounts. Now, the streaming company discovered the cyber intrusion between January 4 and February 21 and determined that threat actors compromised its network between December 28 and February 21 of this year. So, the investigation determined that a limited number of Roku accounts were accessed by unauthorized actors using login credentials obtained from previous breaches of third-party services. Also, they believe credential stuffing was part of this. So, that's obviously a huge issue as well. In other words, they weren't breached, but because you reuse your passwords, people were able to log in and just use your stuff. That's according to their disclosure to Maine, where they basically disclosed this, and they were talking about 363 customers that were impacted. I just can't speak today. Moving on, let's head on down to South Africa and talk about the government pension plan of the South African government. So this is a big one. South African government officials are investigating reports that a ransomware gang stole, then leaked online 668 gigabytes of sensitive national pension data. Now, the alleged compromise of the Government Pensions Administration Agency, or GPAA, their data on March 11th has not yet been publicly confirmed, but the incident is already making national news across Southern Africa. The South Africa Government Employees Pension Fund, or GEPF, GEPF also stepped in to probe claims by the notorious Lockbit ransomware gang. So GEPF is the top pension fund in South Africa, whose customers include 1.2 million current government employees, as well as 473,000 pensioners and other beneficiaries. So heads up to you, if you've got a pension in South Africa, definitely check in. Moving on, let's talk about R1 RCM. They're a provider of revenue cycle management services to hospitals, so here we go. And they recently reported a breach of protected health information for 16,121 individuals, according to their filing with Massachusetts. And we already have our first disclosures as a result of that. So Dignity Health's St. Rose Dominican Hospital de Lima was impacted, and they are reporting because they use R1 RCM. And if your hospital does, heads up to you. Moving on. Let's talk about St. Mary's Healthcare System for Children in Bayside, New York. Now, they identified unauthorized activity within their infrastructure on November 9 of last year, and after a forensic investigation confirmed that files were exfiltrated, basically we are talking about 5,655 identified individuals, and we're talking names and social security numbers. Notifications were sent on March 20. So hopefully St. Mary's Healthcare System for Children did not get you caught up if you're in Bayside, New York. Moving on, let's talk about Douglas County Library in the state of Colorado. Now, attackers got away with names and social security numbers of current and former employees, and that is literally all I know because the rest was behind a paywall and I couldn't find anything else. So heads up to you, employees of Douglas County Library in Colorado. Moving on, let's talk about the city of Jacksonville Beach. This past Wednesday evening, they disclosed that 48,949 people had personal information access during a January cyber attack. In letters to the victims, the city says the name and social security numbers were obtained by the attackers on or about January 29, 2024, and I quote, "City of Jacksonville Beach began experiencing information system issues as a result of a cybersecurity incident," end quote. That's according to them. They basically finished their investigation in late February. That's all I know. So heads up, Jacksonville Beach citizens. Moving on. AI-powered code documentation firm Mintlefly. Now, I've never heard of Mintlefly. Now, an incident notice on their website, the San Francisco-based company said that 91 customer tokens were exposed in a data breach identified on March 1st when it received a report of the issue and discovered unauthorized requests to their servers. Now, after learning that their customer repositories were accessed using GitHub tokens stored in their database, the company revoked all their GitHub token access, rotated security access tokens, hardened security of APIs, excuse me, et cetera, et cetera. And so hopefully your AI-powered code documentation, basically from Mintlefly is okay. So heads up to you. I have no idea how to pronounce that properly. And finally, we've got a couple finalies for you. I want to give you an update on AT&T because 3 years after the attackers first teased an alleged massive theft of AT&T customer data, a breach teller this week dumped the full data set online, and it contains a personal information of 73 million AT&T customers. Now, a new analysis of the fully leaked data set containing names, home address, phone number, social security, and dates of birth points to being authentic. Some AT&T customers have confirmed their leaked data is accurate, but AT&T still hasn't said how this happened. And that is the big issue here, which is why it's one of the finalies. Now, the attacker who first claimed the August 2021 breach basically said they've stolen millions of AT&T customer data, and they only published a small sample of the leaked records at that time, and so it's very difficult to verify the authenticity. AT&T, one of the largest phone carriers in the United States, said back in 2021 that the leaked data, quote, "does not appear to have come from our systems," end quote, but it chose not to speculate as to where the data may have originated or even if it's valid. Now, Troy Hunt, the security researcher behind Have I Been Pwned, recently obtained a copy of the full leaked data set. Hunt concluded that the leaked data was real by asking AT&T customers if it was accurate. Now, in a blog post analyzing the data, Hunt said that of the 73 million leaked records, the data contained 49 million unique addresses, 44 million social security numbers, as well as customer dates of birth. So AT&T says, we don't know how we got hit. Maybe it's not us. Maybe it's not real. We don't know. And yeah, it's real. It's confirmed. So heads up to you if you have AT&T and you've had AT&T since 2021 because your data's in there. I'm willing to bet. And next up is the International Monetary Fund, or IMF. This is also the group that launched 1,000 conspiracy theories all by themselves as well. Now, the IMF disclosed a cyber incident this past Friday after unknown attackers breached 11 IMF email accounts earlier this year. Now, the International Financial Institution, which for the record is funded by 190 member countries, is also a major United Nations financial agency, and it's headquartered in Washington, D.C. Now, according to a press release published the other day, the IMF detected the incident in February and is now conducting an investigation. So far, IMF has found no evidence that the attackers gained access to other systems or resources outside of breached email accounts. Quote, the International Monetary Fund recently experienced a cyber incident, which was detected on February 16, 2024. A subsequent investigation with the assistance of independent cybersecurity experts determined the nature of the breach and remediations were taken. The investigation determined that 11 IMF email accounts were compromised. The impacted email accounts were resecured. We have no indication of further compromise beyond these email accounts at this point in time. The investigation of this incident is continuing, end quote. While the IMF did not provide details regarding the breach, the organization confirmed that it uses Office 365 for Microsoft for its email. So, if this is related to Microsoft's ongoing Russia hacking problem, it's kind of one of the questions here because we know that essentially Microsoft Office 365 got hit by Russian intelligence and they weren't going to damage anything. It was a reconnaissance mission essentially to gather up information on what everybody knew. But if you're gaining access into the back end and you've got an organization as critical as the IMF, why not jump in there too? Or maybe it's separately, you know, independent. But if you recall, Microsoft revealed in January that the Midnight Blizzard Russian hacking group tied to Russian foreign intelligence, as I mentioned, stole Microsoft corporate emails in a month-long breach after compromising Exchange Online accounts in a password spraying attack, and then accessed basically legacy and non-production test tenant environments. So we're not sure at this point if the IMF would basically be caught up in this, but they're a seriously ripe target, you know, either way. And for the record, this isn't the first time. The IMF was also attacked in 2011 in an incident described as a, quote, very major breach, end quote, by one of their officials, which forced World Bank to sever connections between the two organizations as a precaution. Now, the IMF, as I mentioned, it's one of the reasons why it's the finale here, is that it launched 1,000 conspiracy theories. You know, the globalists, the world banks, you know, blah, 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 you know, all of that kind of stuff. And so I suspect that there's going to be basically a whole lot more conspiracies as a result of this. Whether they're true or not is the thing, because there could be some enterprising young prankster or hoax person there that says, I was the one that hit the IMF, and here's the secret emails that I got, you know, about the secret cabal of whatever and the space lasers and all this kind of stuff, because that's essentially what's around them. You know, so obviously that's a huge thing, but the last thing I want to see is even more disinformation ramped up. So those are your breaches of the week. Thank you for putting up with my my congestion today. I'm usually not like this bad, but man, it's kind of crazy here in Chicago at the moment. And I'll see you next time, and hopefully you weren't affected by any of these, but quite frankly, you probably were. I mean, just look at how much data is getting out there every week, and it just keeps getting longer and longer and longer. So there you go. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please, just please, attempt to stay private. Thanks, everybody.